Hey, it's Katie Moran, and welcome to Artistic Spirit. Today I'm here with Sam Eaton, who is a mental health awareness motivational speaker who is empowering you to overcome and thrive. He is an Amazon bestselling author of Recklessly Alive, What My Suicide Attempt Taught Me About God, and Living Life to the Fullest. He also has had more than 200 plus speaking engagements. Welcome today, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So, what do the marketing efforts look like for an Amazon bestselling author?
Hmm, that's a whole journey there. I spent 7 years writing and trying to get my first book traditionally published. Spent a year and a half working on a conditional contract with a publisher. They asked me to write a whole new book, which I didn't love the new book, but
Mhm.
they're the publishing industry, so I trusted them. At the end of that time, they just dropped me. They just decided, oh, you're not famous enough. Good luck. So then after that, I wrote a third version of my first
Mhm.
book, while also building up my platform, creating social media content, creating email subscribers. And eventually, when COVID hit, I decided to just pull the trigger and self-publish. I wanted to
Mhm.
leave my teaching job, and I was speaking so much, people just wanted a book from me. So I luckily have a really great editor. We decided to put it out. I had a really great, my audience was so helpful. I had about 200 readers ahead of time, advanced readers who got the book ahead of time and all shared reviews the week that it started, or the week that we published it. But initially, it did not go as well as I'd hoped. The first 3 months, I got to number one in a few small categories like Amazon authors do, but it did not have the reception that I wanted it to have. But like what I learned pretty quickly is that one piece of content can change your entire life. For those of you that are listening, that your social media isn't your favorite thing or you don't love it, I get it. It's a lot of work. A lot of times you don't get anything back. But after trying just different things, and I wasn't even trying to promote the book truly, I was just trying to create content about my life. And in one of them, I held up some post-it notes of ages of things that had happened to me. And at the end, I held up a book. It went viral on TikTok, and Instagram. My book went to the top 200 best-selling books on all of Amazon. Overnight, I made about $15,000 in a couple of days, and I reshare that video now a couple times a year. And almost every time I do, it sends my book back into the rankings, back into other places. So some of my marketing, and then of course I sell my book at my speaking events. I do a lot of things with that, but I do not center my whole life around selling books. I center my life
Mhm.
around my content around helping someone, and I occasionally mention my book. And I believe that that relationship, because my audience doesn't expect me, they're not listening to me because I'm selling them things. I think they want to support me. And then the fact that it was a good book and it's been so well received continues to market for itself.
What does it mean to be recklessly alive?
That is a really I've spent so much of my life thinking about that, because on my bad days, it's like, you should be living your life better. You should be doing all these crazy things, and you can see those little moments of my book where I'm trying to do that. There's a chapter in my book where I jump out of an airplane and, I decide to run a marathon, and I loved all of those things. But really, it just comes down to asking myself in little moments, what is someone who's living their life to the fullest? What would they do in this moment? Like there's a chapter in my book where I do the polar plunge. For those of you that aren't from cold climates, I'm from Minnesota where it's freezing all the time. We do this thing where we cut a hole in the ice and you jump in for fun, really. Like they tie a rope around your waist and you just jump in because that's a normal idea when it's -30 outside. But there's a chapter about that in my book because I didn't want to do that. And a different version of myself never would have even thought about it. But it is those moments where we live our life and we get this excitement to keep living and keep having these moments. So it's very little things, it's like, what would someone who's recklessly alive do? Oh, they'd probably work out and they'd probably take care of themselves. And they would lean into a hard conversation and they would tell people that they love them when they love them, and they'd try to create good friendships. So I don't know for sure. Honestly, it's just me trying to find the life that I want to live and
Mhm.
find good people to live it with and push myself to not just sit at home by myself, because given the choice, that's what I would do. I'd sit at home and I'd watch true crime and I'd look at my phone. And so the recklessly alive life is more just trying to get me to get out of my comfort zone and actually go after the things that I want out of life.
Yeah, I'd love to go deeper on this topic because I just set aside 3 excerpts that I just would love to read and just have you like go deeper on these topics. So here's the first one. I'm sorry if you hateful people hijacked your confidence and self-worth. I'm sorry your brain has been conditioned to self-destruct. But how many more years are you going to spend hating yourself? How many more years are you going to suffer without giving healing everything you've got?
Mhm.
So what does that look like to give healing everything you've got?
I hear so often from people, and I know it so well, that voice that's like, I will never go to therapy, I will never join a new
Mm,
gym, I will never. And we stop, and that's part of the sick part of our brain that is stopping us from taking the risks to heal. Healing requires risk. It is scary to walk into a therapist's office and share what you're feeling and open up even just a little. It's scary to tell people about things that have happened in your life. I lived most of my life without ever talking about the trauma of being sexually assaulted as a kid, of feeling suicidal. Even after my attempt, I did not tell my family or most of my friends. I really kept it quiet because this world has often taught us that we cannot be real. That, right? It's like we've got good vibes only, and it's like we don't want to hear about the authenticity. Just go look at the comments on some of my videos, and there's a lot of men who just yell at me and tell me that I'm attention seeking, and they just
mm,
say vile things at me. But I have found, when I can find a way to drown all that out, to take a few risks, to stay curious about my mental health instead of judgmental, what works for someone else might not work for me, and that's okay. But I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to fight back against those lies in my brain, and I'm going to just try. Journaling works for some people, so I'm going to try. Oh, that didn't work for me. That's fine. Actually, getting up in the morning and going for a walk every day helps me feel better. Oh, I'm going to keep trying that. And so I think it is just it's staying open-minded and curious about your mental health. No one knows what it feels like to live in your body and your brain, only you. So you get to decide what it is that's going to do that. And then it's taking some of those risks to heal. When I started sharing all of that, when I started finding the courage, I lost a lot of people. There's just a lot
mm.
of people out there who don't want to know those things about me. And it was really hard at the time. I mean, I had many friends say things like, I love you and I'm always here for you, but I don't want to hear about that stuff. And the truth is, then you don't actually want to know me, because those parts are important. Those you can't love me without knowing some of those tough things that I've been through, because they're the reason why I
Mm.
do some of the things that I do. So I guess at the end of the day, it's just valuing yourself enough to know that you are worthy of healing. And even if you don't feel good today, just choosing one thing each day, keep trying, keep moving forward, deciding that you're never going to give up, and just give that what you've got, right? Just what do you have to lose? That's the other piece. Like what do you have to lose by trying to feel better? So I hope people listening to this will just take one risk today. Just try one new thing that might make you feel better, and then try one more tomorrow.
Yeah, I think something that's so profound about your story is this idea that things like sexual assault and suicide attempts can be some of those things that we kind of like conceal in darkness and we hide, and that so much of your story is a point of connection on these topics. And I do a lot of advocacy on X around like healing from sexual assault and overcoming suicidal ideation. And I just think about how beautiful it is that every time you put yourself out there in that way, someone else can feel less alone. And I love that about what you're doing and your story.
I truly didn't know until I started opening up, until I started being more authentic, how much it would help me. Not only does it help other people who see that they're not alone in this, who can see what 10 years from now can look like. And especially when I'm suicidal, my brain is so dark. I'm so stuck in this pain that things will never get better. And I truly believed I would never have another good day worth living. And that was such a lie. I've had plenty of
Mhm.
tough days too, but there have been so many good days. And so I like that I can be just an example of, yeah, you can get through it no matter what. You can find a way through it. You can stay curious. You can keep fighting. And by the way, I'm massively imperfect, massively imperfect, but that's okay because we're all just going to show up as ourselves, like just authenticity. And when I started channeling that, God, everything in my life started getting better because I didn't have to pretend anymore. If somebody doesn't like to hear about that, that's fine. If you're going to choose not to be in my life because this is who I really am, that's just fine. Because then you start to find people who love you for who you are. And my circles have gotten smaller, but gosh, am I happier and healthier than I've ever been because I don't pretend, I don't edit myself to make somebody else feel more comfortable. And I don't play the victim. I don't sit at home and say, woe is me, which I used to do for a long time. But I don't shy away from those hard conversations anymore because I'm not going to feel shame for things that happen to me. That's not mine to carry. So I'm going
Mhm.
to do whatever it takes to break free from that.
Yeah, that brings me to my next excerpt from your book. I hope you walk away from any place that keeps you from becoming the best version of yourself. I hope you thank the people who have left and wish them well. I hope you work so hard on yourself that people notice how much you've changed. I think that's so beautiful. And so much of the time, people would choose to stay stuck in a situation that they think suicide is the only way out rather than make the change to whether it's stop people who are unhealthy for them and their relationship dynamics or um like stop talking to people who make them feel bad about themselves. And what do you say to those people who are afraid to change and that they think it's either suicide or staying where they are when they don't see the option to change?
I think loneliness drove a lot of my fear. I was so afraid of being alone, partly because my mind was a scary place.
Mhm.
But I did everything because I operated out of this idea that I should just be thankful that anyone wants to be in my life at all. And what a terrible mindset to have. Because I also then that didn't leave space to meet the new, kind, helpful people that believed mental health was real, that actually could support me through that because I was spending all of my time with people who couldn't. And this
Mhm.
this is this is a lifelong journey. It is not just like a one-time situation. There was a moment during COVID that I started planning like virtual hangouts with different groups of people from my life. And we every week, I planned one for Monday, Tuesday. I was like trying to help people, trying to keep people connected. And I had this group of old friends that I hadn't talked to in a long time. And I realized after these calls, I felt suicidal. And that wasn't normal at that time in my life. I'd worked so hard. And so my instinct was to just cut them off immediately. And I was like, actually, you know what? I'm going to go back next week and I'm going to be curious about this. And I'm going to see why is it that I feel like crap or that I start having these thoughts that I don't even want to be alive after I hang
Mhm.
out with this group of people. And
Mhm.
so I just sat there and I watched. And when I would share things, people would interrupt. They wouldn't take them seriously. I was the butt of almost every joke. It came back to, and things that were deeply personal to me, things like sexuality, things like friendship, things like that I'd done when I was struggling with alcohol, things that I wasn't okay joking about. Granted, I had never set those boundaries. I had never
Mhm.
stopped these people and said, hey, this isn't okay. And they were just reverting back to the person that I used to be. That like 10 years ago, that is who I was, and that's who they know me as. But I've done all this work to heal and change. And so I think, first of all, just noticing how do you feel after you hang out with some of these people? And relationships aren't 50-50. No, they're never going to be 50-50. I'm not saying abandon people in your life who are depressed or who need you. But you should not feel like crap every time you leave your friends. Those aren't your people, you know? Like one of my phrases
Mhm.
is you're going to be too much for some people and those aren't your people. And I love that because we're not everybody's for us and we don't have to be
Mhm.
best friends with everyone. But I think finding the courage to put yourself first for a while, and that's I don't think that's selfish actually, to find a way to heal and be the best version of yourself
Mhm.
so that you have more to give away to other people. And that is a scary decision to make. But the truth is some people like you miserable. And that's the other thing that I found is that when I got healthy, there were people who didn't want to be around me anymore. They didn't like
Mhm.
the new version of myself. And so all that matters to me is that I like me, that at the end of the day, when I look in the mirror, I'm proud of the person that I've become, that I'm proud that I'm spending my time helping people, that I like that what I'm doing. That's what matters most. And so I hope people listening to this will get there, that they'll decide that, yep, I matter. My healing matters. My mental health matters.
Mhm.
And I'll figure the rest out. And if some people leave, I am strong and brave enough to find better people and put myself out there and reinvent myself in a way that makes me feel alive and makes me want to stay alive.
Yeah, for someone in that situation where they're struggling, what kind of advice would you give them on finding the energy to place a boundary and enforce a boundary? Especially because I think a lot of people who struggle with their mental health, sometimes they know what's right for them and they know what boundary to put up or that they need a boundary, but they have trouble enforcing it because sometimes depression can really drain your energy and things like that. So what would you say to someone who's looking to enforce boundaries?
Yeah. First and foremost, and I know that therapy is a privilege that not everybody has. So
Mhm.
when you're, especially if boundaries are new to you, I would try to either get in a group therapy. There's lots of group therapy that's free online, even these days, or I would walk through this process with a therapist, someone who can help you through the whole thing, because boundaries are really hard, especially if you haven't spent a lot of time. But at the basic level, a boundary is just how you teach people what is okay and what isn't okay, right?
Mhm.
It is our job to teach people how to love us. They shouldn't be guessing what we need and what we want. So we as people who struggle with our mental health, we have to learn how to ask for what we need and how to communicate about what we're feeling to safe people. And
Mhm.
those people need to learn how to support us. So um, I mean, one really practical thing that I did with my closest people is I made a list of things that help me when I'm depressed. It's like, here's a meal you could drop off. Just come do laundry with me. Come sit in my house while I clean.
Mhm.
Write me a nice note. Send me something in the mail. Like I made like a note that I shared with these people. And they can choose not to do that, and that's fine. But it has helped them because now they know what to do and what is, because so often they've said like we want to help but we don't know how. And so when we provide people practical ways to help us, it might hurt because we're taking a risk they might not come through, um, but also they might. And so when it comes down to it, it's just communicating, hey, I really need you to show up for me this week. Is there any way you can make 45 minutes? I need to call in a favor as a friend. And take the risk to say things like that. Or if, hey, you canceled plans on me the last 3 times, I'm really feeling bummed about that. Like I was really excited to see you, and just standing up for yourself. It can feel scary. It can feel tough. But that is how we build strong relationships and how we create the relationships that can help us in those low moments.
How do you have a talk with a friend, say you feel like they're not there for you all the time because they have trouble being there for themselves? How do you have that talk with a friend on encouraging them on their own healing journey?
What a this is such a nuanced conversation. This is so hard to have in the context of like who in the relationship is struggling with their mental health, because I really do think those things change, right? It's like
Mhm.
when we're talking about two healthy people, I would say like, yeah, if this person continuously never shows up for you, it might be time to let them go or see them not that often. But if someone has a mental health issue, then obviously like those things change and we have to give sometimes more than we take. But how we have that discussion, I always approach with questions. truly, it's any hard topic, any hard discussion, when you just lead and keep asking questions, I promise you it's going to go so much better. That it might be something like, "Hey, the last 3 times that we were going to hang out, you canceled. I just want to make sure, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you?" Sometimes when people they isolate when they are feeling depressed, does that feel like
Mhm.
what you're doing? How can I help you? How can I be there for you? It's like it's when we ask questions instead of, "Hey, you've canceled on me 3 times. If you cancel on me again," right? It's like you're starting with conflict instead of just starting with care and concern. I'm worried about you. I want you in my life. You're an important person. How can we help each other? I
Mhm.
think, and again, that's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to say and to ask and to go there, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And you get to tell that person how much they mean to you.
Yeah, I really hear what you're saying, and I think just because we're going kind of from all angles of this, what happens if you find out someone is not a safe person for you?
It really helps me to think of friendships or relationships in different categories. I don't think
Mhm.
we have to, if you are being abused, if there's a safety issue, that's different. Get yourself out, get yourself help, call
Mhm.
an abuse helpline. That is a different conversation. So if someone listening's in that situation, that's very different. If it's just a person who is kind of selfish, they just don't really support you, they're not a person who shows up when you need them, I might just push them out to the occasional friend. I've got my people, I've got my core 3 to 5 people. They always know what's going on. I can call them in the middle of the night. I would tell them anything, they would tell me anything. And that took years. I mean, I'm 35. That took a really long time to find and cultivate those friendships. Um, but there's been several times where just life changes. And one of those people, maybe they get married and they have kids. They don't have time to be that person. I still want them in my life. That doesn't make them a bad person.
Mhm.
So now they're just a person that I catch up with a few times a year, and that's totally fine. But having those expectations of like, and then maybe there's a person who I care about them. We've known each other for 20 years. We're just gonna get coffee once a year. And that's it. That's where I'm at, is that I don't
Mhm.
want you in my life every single day. And that's okay, right? I That's the trick, is figuring out, make sure that matches, and the skills that they have the skills to love you the way that you deserve. And that if not, it's okay to lessen the frequency that you see them, lessen the frequency that you talk to them. um, I think that's just fine.
Mhm. I love that so much. So here is the last, I don't know if I should even say the word, if I could say it, excerpt. I don't know, I think the P isn't coming out. I can't believe I just said that. Um, yeah. I hope you're brave enough to focus on what matters most. I hope you're courageous enough to fight complacency and get your hands dirty. I hope you finally realize that your life was never about you. You were made to make a difference.
So my second book is coming out at the end of this year, hopefully November or December. It is called Healing Out Loud, and it is about this. It's about how I started recklessly alive,
Mhm.
and this kind of just emergence into the world of this story, um,
Mhm.
and how that truly changed and saved my life in so many ways, that focusing all of this pain that I have to help somebody else was the best thing I ever did. And for so many years, people weren't watching. Like, people might look and like, "Oh, well, you have, 170,000 followers." But I mean, I've been doing this since 2016. I posted every day for 3 years almost, to a few thousand people. I did that for a long time, even when it felt like nobody was watching, because it was both. And I have learned primarily by accident. It was just like, I'm going to do something. I don't know what that is. I'm just going to keep trying what works.
Mhm.
Um, but by focusing on all of that and by trying to use what I was learning in therapy to help other people, it also helped me. And it helped me not feel less alone. And it helped create these connections. And I get to meet people, incredible people like you, from all over the world. And like, now on a Friday, I just get to have a nice conversation on a podcast. And I love that. All of that is very healing to me. It's so, it helps them and it helps me. And it helps that past version of me,
Mhm.
like in so many ways. And that's kind of how I've decided to live my life is I try to reach back into my story and help someone who is where I was, whether that is someone who's been sexually assaulted, whether that's someone who's felt suicidal, whether that's someone who grew up without a dad like I did. It's like, what are the pain points in my story? What's the work that I can do to then help somebody else have it a little bit easier than me? And that is the most joy, that is the most alive that I ever feel. It doesn't matter what I do. When I focus my life on that, I feel better and other people feel better. And we kind of find this collective healing together.
Mhm.
And I think, all of you that are listening, that are writers, that are speakers, it's tough at the beginning when it doesn't feel like people are listening, but somebody is. People are paying attention, people are getting help from what you're doing. And if you just stay and focus on that person, just focus on the one person, focus your content, your writing, your speaking, forget about you, forget about I want to be famous, forget all of that. Put all of that aside and just focus on I'm going to help one person today decide to stay, or I'm going to help one person today feel a little bit better, laugh from my writing, or find healing, whatever that part of your story is. And it's just the most beautiful thing about life that they feel helped and seen and heard, and so do we.
Yeah, I think something that is so powerful with that is this idea that sharing our story can be something where other people not necessarily look at us and see our story, but they see themselves in the story. And I think it goes back to that quote that like it's not about you. And I think it's so powerful, this idea that when people are really authentically who they are, it's easier for us to see ourselves in them. And I'd love to hear a little bit about the writing process because these are difficult things to talk about and difficult things to write about. And I think I'm not sure. I think you said you were doing speaking events before you finished writing. So what was that emotional processing what did that look like to you? And how was that when you were writing, like the writing process, the processing it as you were speaking, like what did that look like for you?
It was harder than I ever could have imagined. It
Mhm.
was one thing to sit at home and write about these sad stories, and I both times I've sat down to write these books, I've needed to go to therapy and also
Mhm.
process with a professional, because like it is to sit in some of the hardest days of your life and write about. I mean, you're describing the carpet in the where this pastor said the worst thing you've ever heard, like you're
Mhm.
and then you're editing it for days. Like you're just sitting in these really heavy, painful stories. So
Mhm.
for me, I haven't loved the writing process because it sends me to a dark place. It really does, and it's getting easier. I've been telling all my friends, I was like, I cannot keep writing sad books. But there is a lot of research that shows when you've been through a lot of trauma, writing out your trauma actually does help you and helps heal you,
Mhm.
because you get to frame what happened to you and you get to say exactly how you experienced it. So much of my childhood, even as an adult, people say things like, well, that's not what happened. And, you're not remembering that, right?
Mhm.
Just straight up gaslighting, honestly. But hey, I get to frame this story how I remember and how it happened to me, and something about that process. And my first book, I was like, as it was for me, I was like, if it helps one other person, great, but I'm doing this for me. And it changed my internal dialogue from look at all these terrible things that happened to me into look at all these things that I've survived. And it changed my mind. I am resilient. I am strong. I'm a fighter. I
Mhm.
found different words to describe my story. Once I wrote it, once I reflected on it, once I did the work of, oh, look at all these stories that led me to not want to be alive. And I had a therapist say to me, that's probably anyone who lived that story would have
Mhm.
got to where you got. And it's moments like that where we can give ourselves a break. We can
Mhm.
say to ourselves, hey, you've been through some really hard stuff. And that's okay. We're going to work through that. We're going to keep working through that. We're going to rest when we don't have the energy. But our stories matter, and our stories can save somebody else. It helps us and it helps them.
Mhm. For the speakers that are listening, what advice would you give them for getting speaking gigs and also preparing themselves to talk about hard topics?
Mhm. First of all, take every free event that you can get, because when you're new, you need the practice of what it's like to be in front of an audience. You need the practice of crafting a speech and the flow and deciding when to skip a slide and when to lean into the humor and when to lean into the heart. Um,
Mhm.
I was a teacher, so I had a bit of a head start in just I spent 10 years speaking in front of classes of people. I was in theater, I did speech in high school. And so there's just you just need practice being in front of a
Mhm.
crowd of people. And I think free events are a really great place. I did at-risk teen centers. So there's here in Minnesota, there's like 20 by one organization. And so the first one somebody asked, and then I was like, hey, could I just speak to your other kids? I've spoken in prisons. That's one of my favorite places to speak. I don't charge them. I just go and I get to share an encouraging message to these men
Mhm.
who struggled. So I think if you're focused on money, um, that's where it gets tricky for me. Even now, it's like now it's I try to just focus on helping people and getting better at what I'm doing. And I just believe that the money will come. And almost always, like one speaking event leads to the next. And so
Mhm.
I always ask, hey, what's your budget? And then I do my best to work within that. And if I'm not going to lose money, I try to go. And that's how I've operated. Might not work for everybody else, but it really has worked for me and continues to work for me. And that's just kind of how I operate. If I try to put as much good out into the world, and I just believe, and so far it's proven right that those good things come back to me one way or another.
Mhm. And the question of speaking to hard topics, any advice there for new speakers?
Yeah. Yeah, if you're going to share about trauma, you really have to plan some self-care around that.
Mhm. Mhm.
When I'm in my early days, I quickly had learned I needed a full recovery day after I was going to speak. And sometimes that was like a Saturday, after the work week, but our bodies trauma is stored in our bodies, and some of the research has shown that when you tell that story, your body is reliving it like it's actually happening to you again. And it's
Mhm.
and the vulnerability of standing up in front of these people. I mean, Brene Brown has described like this feeling of like a vulnerability hangover, and I really have identified with that. And that's where I
Mhm.
like when I go on a trip to speak, I always do my best to plan, okay, Sunday when I get back, it's TV, it's a couch, it's a book, it's a puzzle. It's like just let myself recover from, because
Mhm.
you're giving so much away. And I have burned out several times. I've had to take 4 to 6 months off and just be like, sorry, I'm not taking speaking events the rest of the year. I'm too zapped. I had a full-time job at that time teaching, which was also very emotional. But I think we have to really listen to our bodies and listen to our brains about what that's saying. And I've had times where I didn't want to tell the story, and I just changed it a little bit.
Mhm.
I didn't linger in the hardest parts. I kind of glossed over them. And that's okay. As a speaker, you learn those skills and you learn the ways to feel better. And I had a therapist say, Sam, someday it's not going to be as hard to tell this story. And I didn't believe him. I didn't believe him for a long time. And he was right. Now, 7, 8 years later, it's like, yeah, I can tell this story and it doesn't hurt. It's not as painful. But it took a lot of time and a lot of practice to get there. So it's just be patient with yourself, be kind, let yourself rest, and then really plan that self-care around that vulnerability.
I have a question about your relationship with God and how has it changed throughout this course of struggling and then having this struggle turn into a calling?
I have a complicated relationship with church.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I write about that a little bit in the book. My experiences in church have not been awesome, and they've seemed to be these churches have really been about money. They've been about hierarchy. It's who's more
Mhm.
important and who's invited to what club. And when I read the Bible, when I read the book of James, when I read the Gospels, all of those stories are centered around helping people and living out our faith. And when I look at
Mhm.
our churches, I just don't see that. And I tried to change those systems from within for a long time. But I don't know how anyone can look at these mega churches I was a part of and read the least of these, read Jesus saying, "What you do for the least of these, you do for me," and be like, yeah, we're doing a good job. Like, we've got a multi-million-dollar building with movie theater seats and we've got bouncy castles. Where is our care for the poor, for the least of these? And so it was through a lot of mission trips. It was through, I've just always had in my heart that following Jesus and following God is about helping people. It's about
Mhm.
helping people who can never repay you. Um, and so that is what I gravitate towards in my relationship with God and with faith. I don't, when I look too hard at religion, especially American Christianity, it's not, I that's not what I want to be a part of. And no judgment to anybody who does. And I'm not saying I never will go to church, but I've been really hurt by the church, and I've had to work really hard to not put that hurt onto God and onto Jesus. And some of you listening might identify with that for sure. But so I guess I work hard to separate the two. I work hard to be like, you know what? That, yeah, God has the power to put those people into power, but they have free will. They chose to say those awful things to me. They chose to do those
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
At the heart, God is good. God is love. And if I want to model my life to be more like Jesus, he didn't spend his time around people like that. He spent his time helping those people who were outcasts of society and who didn't feel a place they belonged. And suicide prevention kind of became that for me, because we don't
Mhm.
talk about it, because
Mhm.
it is such a taboo topic, because every day people tell me I should just kill myself instead of sharing my story on social media. And so um faith faith is complicated. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be curious. It's okay to take breaks from churches and religious communities. Everybody's faith journey is going to look a little bit different. But at the end of the day, I just try to focus on the heart of it: love, helping people, love God, love others.
Yeah, I think that'll really resonate with my audience because so many of them identify as spiritual rather than like religious. And I have a lot of like interfaith people come on. My first book was on Islamophobia after 9/11. So that's like part of my platform. And I think it's so important that when we talk about faith, it's something that brings us together rather than tears people down. And I recently made a post about like trans rights and just like how like I believe in trans rights because I believe in God and God has shown me to love people. So I think I think that's a hard thing for some people to wrap their head around, but I think like the people who appreciate my content really do agree with me and feel that same way and believe that we're stronger than what we face and that it can be a lesson for someone else, the things we go through and what we take from them. Um, yeah, so I'd love to talk about this idea of hate and something that you do that I think is unique is that you address the hate, and I see so many people just ignore the hate. And I think like especially when you talk about like topics that are hard to speak on, like it can be triggering when people read a comment that is directed toward you but it hurts them because they say this is something that's true about me too. So I think I don't know if you do this on purpose or if you recognize this, but when you stand up for yourself, you're really standing up for all the people who follow you, and I think that's so profound. And I know I've had more confidence to talk about overcoming suicidal ideation and healing from sexual assault because of your content and because of the way that you have addressed things, like whether it's like in your highlights or you make a post about it. Like I know it's been something that has allowed me to show up for the people in my communities, and I just thank you for that, number one. And number two, I'd love to hear, like, do you have a strategy for dealing with the hate? Like, do you consciously think to yourself, like, this is a safe space and I'm going to protect it?
This is such a complicated discussion, and I have no perfect answer. I've been through several versions of what's my strategy on how to deal with all of that. First and foremost, I had a blog post about 2018 that went mega viral about the church. It was called 12 Reasons Millennials Are Over Church. Um,
Mhm.
I got thousands of emails and hate comments about what a horrible person I was. And in the blog post, I said things like, "Oh, we should serve the poor." But I was like massively attacked for that. And it was really hard. It was really tough. It was really hard. It's
Mhm.
still, I wrote about that in the second book, but it taught me something really quickly. First and foremost, that none of that hate is about me. I haven't done,
Mhm.
these people have never met me. They don't know anything about me personally. And I am not interested in anyone's opinion whose life I wouldn't trade spots with. Like
Mhm.
if you are living the kind of life that is loving and caring and helping people, if you're in the arena with me, you're trying to make a difference and you've got something to say about what I'm doing, please tell me. I want that feedback. But if you're sitting at home with a faceless profile picture spewing hate, like that's 100% a reflection of your own happiness, of the systems that you grew up in. And I don't have to let that get
Mhm.
into here, right? Like I've got this wall up, and I'm not saying I still have tough days, because it's a lot of it's about masculinity, specifically for what I do. But I also am I'm not going to be a punching bag anymore. I am not. And I think it's really important for me to show people how much hate I get so that they can see how hard I'm fighting to try to help. When I just delete
Mhm.
and block those people, I think it robs some discussion around how prevalent the stigma is, truly. I think because we don't see that in our day-to-day life. And also, like, I'm not trying to hurt anyone. And I try to model how do we intelligently speak back in a way that maybe it's a little biting, but like one thing I say a lot is I'm really sorry for whatever's happened to you that has made you so bitter and angry and that makes you think it's okay to treat people like this. I sincerely hope you get help. It must be really hard to live in a brain like that.
Mhm.
I love things like that because I'm genuinely showing them concern because I am sorry. Like, what a sad life to sit at home and scream things at someone, tell someone they should kill themselves because they're trying to
Mhm.
help people. And
Mhm.
so I have a complicated relationship. Sometimes I'm like, I know I should ignore it, and I get sucked in and I'll start typing something and I'll delete it. I'm like, okay, that's too far. And I've seen even just like within the last few weeks, some of my audience starting to get kind of mean to these people. I was like, nope, okay, that's not what I'm trying to do. But I think it's okay to put people on blast who say really toxic and horrible things. I think that's okay. And I think it shows, I hope it shows some teenagers that it's okay to stand up for yourself. It's okay. These people are closed-minded and that we don't have to own that, but we also don't have to be a punching bag for it either.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And also this idea that like some days it is hard to like see the hate. I was talking to Tom Bilyeu about this, and he said that he was like, once he hit the 1 million mark, he stopped looking at comments, but he was like, every time he sees something, like it still stings. And
Wow.
that idea that like it's not something that ever goes away, it's just something like people kind of like lose access to you. And I thought that was like really telling because I had a hard time when I was first putting out content because I would get so much hate like about my body and
Mm.
like just like anything you can get hate on. And it was really hard for me, and people kept telling me to like toughen up, and I just like I didn't see how that could make any sense because it's like I didn't stop posting. I kept trying to reach people, and in my mind, like I think when you are hurting and you still you're still having courage to be there for your community, I think that that is really tough. And like that's a sign of strength. And that I don't think closing yourself off to the world is ever helpful for anyone.
No, and I agree with you, and I agree with the statement that, like, sometimes it still does sting, absolutely,
Mhm.
and we all have to find our own way through it. Like, it is absolutely okay to just block and ignore all of those comments, that's just fine. And if you wanna stand up with yourself, that's just fine. And if yesterday you just wanted to block them because you were already having a tough mental health day, and today you feel a little bit stronger and you wanna talk back a little bit, that's okay too. So it's just kind of this acknowledging, for me, it's okay. Let's employ empathy. I'm gonna like, oof, okay, don't need to accept that opinion. And then also figuring it out day by day. We're all just trying. We're out here trying to figure it out. And but if I'm just genuinely trying to help people and I'm getting hate for that, awesome. For me, it means I'm on the right track. Like all positive change in the world is gonna meet resistance. It doesn't matter what the movement is. It doesn't matter how great of a human being you are. You could be the most perfect person on the planet and people are gonna hate you. They're gonna hate you. And so you just once you accept that as fact and focus back in on helping people, making a difference, being authentic, sharing your story, then it's like, okay, great. I start to see the hate as, oh, I'm on the right track. I'm touching something in them. I'm triggering something in them, um, because of the love that I'm sharing and the hope that I'm sharing. And I actually like that framework. That helps me. And yeah, I see it as a sign of the good that I'm doing in the world, not that I'm doing anything wrong.
Well, I just want to thank you again because when you address the hate in just like such an elegant way that you do, really shows strength, and it reminds me that the things I've been through is a testament to how I can be there for other people, and that this idea of how low we go is how low we can go to lift someone else up.
Mhm.
And I think when I see like your strength with the comments and the hate, it just reminds me so much that I'm stronger than the hate. And that even I think I know you said you don't want anyone to kind of like polarize in the comments, like with like the hate comments, but this idea that other people believe in the same thing you're doing and are there to support you. I think that is so powerful. And even if sometimes, because I get the same stuff, like it seems misguided, like some of the like people going back at the hate. But I think like again, it's like such a testament to like how important these ideas are, and this idea that none of us like go through it alone. And I think one of the most powerful things in sharing your story is this idea, and I've brought it up probably like a bunch of times on on this podcast episode, but just that like this place where we feel so alone, and like I think about it too because I think about like when I was in college and like in my dorm room and I like locked the door and I felt so alone, and I think about all the times that I've connected with people now, like, and I feel like how you say, I think it's so powerful, like this past version of yourself heals. Like
Mhm.
I think about that loneliness, and I think because I was there, it allows for me to speak to people who are there.
Yes.
And it's just like I think when you share your story, the most powerful part is that these passive versions of you that feel so lonely, like are not alone.
Yes, and the places of our deepest pain are also our greatest opportunity to help others. And again, it takes time. I'm not saying if you've never done anything today, just go out on the street corner and start shouting about what you've been through. It's like
Mhm.
you heal, and then the farther you get along on your healing, you're able to go back and speak to that girl who's still in that dorm room and say, "Hey, just do one thing for yourself today. Hey, just try to go to one floor party today. Just try to meet one new person," right? It's like we can use that. And it just makes all the difference.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, and I think this idea of like connecting with people is so powerful, but also this is something, I don't know if it was recent or I just like scrolled really far back on your page doing research. But this idea of like sharing your story being this thing where of a point of empowerment rather than trauma dumping. And something I always like say to people is that like you speak from your scars and not your wounds, and making sure that like you always are coming from a place where someone can get a lesson from it and that you're not looking for validation from it. So can you speak a little bit to that about this idea of sharing your story for empowerment rather than trauma dumping?
That is, there's a fine line there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely is. I think we all know that person who it's like, you're like, hi, how are you? And then they just tell you every bad thing that's ever happened to them. So part of it is about, yes, you're right. It's, you got to be clear about what your motivation is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I always just go back to, okay, I'm trying to help people. I think it's okay to learn about that process as you go and learn
Mm-hmm.
about, what do you feel comfortable sharing about? I don't talk about my sexual assault almost at all. That post-it note was, I think, maybe the first time I'd ever shared it online. I've
Mm-hmm.
never created content around it. I've done a lot of therapy around it. That for me is, I can't, maybe someday, but and that's okay. Like, I just, instead of pushing myself to share things that I don't want to share, um, that I just try to listen to myself and find the courage to speak to the things that I feel okay speaking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I let that change day to day too. But for me, it's about authenticity. Again, it just always comes back to that word for me. It's a vulnerability is contagious. And I have seen that over and over again through my speaking. When I am brave enough to share that I struggled there, somebody else says yes. And then somebody else finds courage from that to open up to them. And so I don't know that there is a perfect answer to figure out what is the difference. But
Mm-hmm.
first, it's just recognizing who the audience is, what's it for, and who's it helping, and who might it help, and then just being willing to find your way through that and be like, yep, I shared too much there. I got it, and learn from it. It's all just, we're just learning. We're all learning how to be
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and share, and then also not being mad at yourself or owning other people's awkwardness around the topic. I guess that's the
Mm-hmm.
other really important thing I would say is it takes two people to have an awkward interaction. So if I am at a party and I say I'm a suicide prevention speaker and that person gets awkward and walks away, it's not my fault. It's not my fault that
Mm-hmm.
whatever you have in your life, you aren't able to hear the word suicide in that context. I don't have to own
Mm-hmm.
that, right? I didn't I didn't share details. I didn't share anything that's inappropriate to share. I just shared who I was. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's both of that too. It's releasing ourselves from owning other people's awkwardness. I don't have to feel awkward because you have a stigma about mental health. That's about you. That's not about me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think something that I think it's right now, it's so obvious. Like I think you mentioned how you don't really scroll, but right now with like the quiet on set stuff, how people are kind of
Yes.
like inappropriately asking people to share their trauma, and they're looking for people and they're making posts about like speculating about trauma people have had. And I think something people don't get about content creators or speakers or writers who talk about like real life events is that some things are private and some things are public, and that you hone those stories that share the message that are part of what you speak on or what you write about. But you also have things that you aren't comfortable speaking about or that are private to you that isn't in the public sphere. And I think it's so important for people to recognize that even people who might have a public account, like they still have boundaries. And even like I think a lot of people like look to celebrities and think like, oh yeah, like because they're a celebrity they can't have any boundaries, like it's like we're entitled to everything. And I just think that's completely not true. And it's really great and powerful when someone stands up for something and owns their story and publicly takes their story to help other people. But it's not something we're ever entitled to. And boundaries are so, so important. And what would you say to people specifically like right now? I think there's like this kind of like frenzy for people to come out and make a statement about their trauma that they've been through or haven't been through. And then not only that, once they do make that statement, it's criticized.
You just said so many wise things right there. I feel like I don't even need to answer because you just answered with such a it's truly brilliant. And that absolutely we are not required to share anything with anyone. It doesn't matter if it's a crazy aunt, it doesn't matter.
Mhm,
You get to decide what parts of your story that you're going to share at any given time, and that's allowed to change and evolve. And I think asking yourselves, even maybe writing down what are things that I'm willing to talk about right now and what are things that I'm not willing to talk about right now. And
mhm,
you know, it's trial and error. You know, I used to share a little bit about romantic relationships. I don't anymore because
mhm,
I don't that's not what I want to talk about and that's not what I want my content to be about. And I don't want to hear other people's opinions about dating and what I've been through, and that's okay. That's great. That's nobody's business, you know. I One of my post-it notes is about getting kicked out of church, and finally I'm ready to tell that story in my second book, but I
mhm,
wasn't for a long time, and I let that go. That's They can be curious, that's on them, but they're not entitled to me. Access to my energy is a
mhm,
privilege. That's another one of
mhm,
my favorites. Access to
mhm,
my energy is a privilege, and nobody is deserves or just is entitled to my life. I pour out what I want to pour out. I pull back, I take breaks when I need
mhm,
it, and maybe there's some day where I want to walk away from all this, and I might, and that's also okay. It's giving ourselves
mhm.
permission to listen to what we want to share, to give when we have to give, to pull back and rest when we want to pull back, and just knowing that we can say no. No is a complete sentence. No. Can you share? No. Hey, I'm really no, and that's okay. It's our life. We're driving the ship.
Thank you so much for coming on today, Sam.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.